Okay, today is Friday, September the 28th, and I'm sitting here in Toronto, Canada. My name is John Richardson, and today I'm hosting a discussion with a U.S.-based immigration lawyer, Joe Grasmick, who is based in Buffalo, New York, and has a practice that is, he tells me, restricted to Canadian business immigration. So he has basically made a career out of working with Canadian citizens who want to go to the U.S. and work there, and I gather a lot of other sorts of things. Immigration law, incidentally, is an enormously complex area. So to say that somebody is an immigration lawyer is, at this point, I think, would you agree, practically meaningless. There's so many different aspects to it, etc. But, for everybody who's interested in the topic of Americans abroad, renunciation of U.S. citizenship is a very prevalent topic these days, and I think probably getting more prevalent with the escalation and a number of the problems that we'll touch on today. And I'm putting together a series of videos and discussions with different people on the renunciation question. What does it mean? Is it a good idea or not? And I've invited Joe specifically because I think it's very, very important to get a perspective from somebody who I think would not, as a general principle, encourage renunciation of U.S. citizenship. Is that generally your position?
Yep.
Okay.
I agree with you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So could you perhaps elaborate on that a little bit? Perhaps over the years, I mean, how many years have you been working in this area?
Almost 40 years.
Okay, yeah, okay. So after, that's longer than a lot of people have been alive who are considering renouncing.
Mm-hmm.
So after a lifetime of working with this problem, I gather you've seen the ups and downs and interests in renunciation and not. I mean, what can you tell us a little bit about what you've seen over the years?
Yeah, well, most of what I've seen is people who want to hang on to their citizenship. And I find that not just people who want to hang on to their U.S. citizenship, but people who want to come to the United States and work is highly dependent on the relative economic situation between the two countries, specifically the relative long-term unemployment rates between the two countries. For example, right now I'm sensing a switch. I just heard that Ontario just lost 80,000 jobs in August.
80,000.
80,000 jobs.
Any particular industry, or?
I'm hearing the news. 80,000 jobs across the board.
That's a good chunk of jobs.
And at the same time, Buffalo has the lowest unemployment rate in decades. Mm-hmm. So you've got these push-pull factors, which I think are more important than a lot of the other factors. And you heard about the lost decade in Canada when the economic situation was poor, and that's when I did a lot of my practice. So my practice has been people wanting to hang on to their citizenship, fighting to keep it.
And wanting to get it, I guess.
And wanting to get it,
Yeah.
Going through the process. So that's the perspective from where I'm coming. I know recently there's a lot of people who are talking about, getting rid of their citizenship and renouncing, and there was a few years ago a spike and a rush in the consulate of people who wanted to renounce their citizenship, and now I understand that's leveled off. So it's no longer a hill going up. It's not going down.
But it's a consistent number of people.
And also,
wanting to
interestingly enough, there's an increase lately in the amount of no-shows, people who make appointments and don't show up, to the extent that it's concerning the consulates. So I don't know if this is just a fluke or whether it's reflecting said economic indicators that I discussed, that people are having second thoughts. We just don't know.
Well, I can tell you that in certain cases, people I've talked to, what it's actually reflecting is concern about the shift in U.S. immigration policies, and concern about whether they're going to be able to, visit family and that sort of thing. I mean, I wouldn't imagine that that's a problem, but I do think that this might be a good moment to address the reality that, one of the advantages to U.S. citizenship, of course, is that you have a right to enter the United States, to live or to work or
You can never be an undesirable.
Yeah, or an excludable.
Exactly.
And once you renounce U.S. citizenship, you default back into being an alien, which I suppose means that you could be an excludable alien under certain circumstances. I mean, I do understand that Canadians have extremely, generally, preferential entry to the United States, I suppose, right? But there is still, I suppose, that theoretically. But what I think is happening in terms of the no-shows is more concern about what happens after renunciation. But
It's forever. It's something you can't revert. You can't say, "Oops, I made a mistake. I'm taking it back. Let me go back and renew it." It's forever. You renounce it. That's it.
It is forever. You could get it again, I suppose, by running the whole green card process.
Yes,
and,
correct.
et cetera. But that, of course, there's no guarantee you can get a green card. Or, well, I mean, in a general sense, what are the easy ways to get a green card? The easiest.
Two main ways of getting green cards that concern my clients. One is through close kinship to U.S. citizens or to permanent residents.
Now, I understand there's a difference between immediate family and
Right.
sort of a more extended family.
Right.
Maybe you can
Aunts, uncles,
elaborate on
cousins,
that.
forget that.
Okay.
But-
Too far removed.
Exactly. And it's really, for anybody interested in that, just Google State Department Visa Availability Report, and it comes out every month and has all the categories and how long you have to wait for each category, depending on what country you were born in.
Right.
The other path is through employment, and that can be the super fast green cards where you don't need to go to the Labor Department first, or the green cards where you go to the Labor Department and show that you're not taking a job away from an American. And those
Or-
are the two main paths.
Okay, or the very immediate family, the spouse of a U.S.
Correct.
citizen. That's
Correct.
also relatively painless and quick, as I understand.
Relatively, yes.
Relatively.
And then 3 to 5 years as a permanent resident, intending to be resident all the time, and half of that period of time being physically present in the U.S., you can apply to become a naturalized citizen.
Right. Now, how did the physical presence works? Is that just literally counting up the days that you
Yes,
spend in
correct.
the United States?
And a partial day in the U.S. counts as a full day, because a lot of Canadians go back and forth.
Sure. So it's not actually the same thing as residence. It's actually just presence, physical
Correct.
presence.
Residence
Although I'm
is
sure they overlap.
Residence is the intent in your head,
Right.
not where your head hits the pillow,
Sure.
but what you intend in your mind. And there's things that you can do that show that intent, but it's basically what your intent is.
So essentially then, if it's just intent, one could be in a situation where one was not physically present in the United States, intend to live there permanently, and really still have the immigrant visa or the green card, even though they're outside the United States. That's correct?
Yes. And there are certain presumptions that you intended to give up your residence depending on how long you've been out. But basically, your head does not have to hit the pillow every night in the U.S. to be a resident.
Well, maybe we can talk a little bit about what would be the things that would be positive indicators of intent to live permanently in the United States, and things that would cause problems. What would be the positive indicators?
I think there's two big ones. One's the law in the books, and the other is the law in action. In other
Okay.
words, the legal factor and then a practical factor. The legal factor is where you file your tax return as a resident. A 1040, I always say a 1040 NR is an NO.
Okay.
Filing a tax return as a non-resident, if you have a green card. So filing your tax return as a resident is a very strong legal factor, and it's something, you can even carry it around in your glove compartment, your tax return.
It's gotten to that.
Yeah. Like some of my clients, their tax return's that thick. so I
Sure,
don't-
yeah.
The practical factor, because the people at the border, they're human, they're going to say, where do you live? And is having a place. If you can't own a house, at least lease it. If you can't lease it, sublease it. Although that's not a necessary legal factor for maintaining your residence.
It's evidence of intention.
It's something, as a practical matter, it makes the questions go away.
What about things like maintaining a driver's license.
Yeah.
And,
Then you
a
have
library card.
Then you have a whole slew of stuff. I call it the wallet test or the purse test. What if Customs and Border Protection would go through your wallet or purse, which they do, by the way. How much says U.S. and how much says Canada? So the more that says U.S., the better. The more that says Canada, the worse in terms of trying to, prove your intent to have continuous residence in the United States.
Now, actually, continuing on this for a moment, I've read your stuff for years, and I really like it. So, incidentally, if people watching this, visit Joe's site. I think it's grasmick.com, correct?
Correct.
A lot of very interesting articles on it. But one of them I remember reading some years ago had to do with what happens if, let's say, a Canadian who has a permanent resident visa, evidenced by the green card, okay, comes into the United States and is sort of bullied into signing the I-407, in other words, the voluntary abandonment of green card or permanent residence visa. What would you advise somebody to do in a situation like that?
Oh, I would say don't sign it, don't abandon it, because although we've been able to turn those back, after the fact, it's very strong evidence that you intended to abandon your.
How do you get them reversed in a situation like that? So somebody signs something saying they're voluntarily, and a lot of people do. I mean, I've talked to many people over the years who've abandoned the. Basically what's happening is that they go to the border, they're asked questions about where they live, and the border guard decides that they've lost the intention to reside permanently in the United States, correct? And then invites them to voluntarily abandon the status. So they do, probably not even knowing what they're doing because they're under such stress. What after the fact can be done to get that reversed?
Well, there's part of that answer I know, and part of that answer I don't know, because I'm not really good at litigation. I think I've done one deportation case in my entire 40-year career, and it was a pro bono case for Volunteer Lawyers Project. What I would do first of all is try to work it out at the border. You can work out a lot of things with the border officials. Just try to work it out. Try to get the green card back, because they're going to lift the green card along with the, with the when they have you sign the abandonment form.
Okay, now just pausing there for 1 second, because I find there's a lot of confusion on this. So the green card is evidence of the permanent resident visa. It's like a travel document.
Correct.
Okay. So the issue is not the green card per se. It's like a passport or something like that. The issue is what it represents, which is the right to live permanently in the United States. So you sign the I-407, you're signing a voluntary abandonment of your right to live in the United States. And so what I am understanding you to be saying is that you have a discussion and negotiate and explain.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
And that's the best way to do it. And I know that there are hearings that you can do, and again, that's kind of out of the realm of my expertise. I'd probably contract a colleague at that juncture.
You don't want it to get to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Level. You don't want it to get
exactly.
there.
And you don't want to get to the level where they're lifting the green card either. What happens usually is before that happens. I mean, often I'll get phone calls, and they made me sign this form, or I couldn't get in, or whatever. But most of the time, you feel it. People feel that the questions are getting a little more difficult. Where do you live? Well, do you have a place you're staying there? The questions. Well, I'm going to let you in this time. That kind of questions. And so people will call me, and then at that point, that's a good time to prevent, so you don't get to that point where they're lifting your green card and making you sign the abandonment form. Yeah,
and I've had instances like that as well. And one of the most frightening things on this, the losing the permanent resident visa is bad enough, but for people who've had it more than 8 years and have a net worth of more than $2 million, they could be then subjected to the, what's really a pretty draconian set of exit taxes.
Well, and that gets us back to our original main topic. that's another good reason to get your citizenship. Citizens can live anywhere.
Right.
Once you say you are married to a U.S. citizen, you've 3 years residence or otherwise 5 years, you can apply for naturalization. Once you get that, you can live anywhere you want.
You can basically leave indefinitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, would you agree that,
So that's one of the advantages of hanging on to your dual citizenship, because citizens can live anywhere.
yeah, but they also have to comply with all the regulatory regime wherever they live. But, I mean, I think that, interestingly, one of the reasons why people become citizens of countries all over the world, Canada, I mean, certainly in Canada, the United States, is so that they can leave, for indefinite periods of time and come back. So let's say that somebody is considering renouncing U.S. citizenship, and a lot of people sure are. So they lose citizenship, they're no longer a citizen. What are your thoughts on the kinds of things that might keep them from being admitted to the United States from that point on, that could make them excludable aliens, that would prevent them from crossing the border?
Well, there's a laundry list of things. Some, most people probably listening to this will say, well, I don't fall into those categories.
They don't know what the
But-
categories are.
Yeah, exactly. Like I say, it's kind of like marriage. It's not just a piece of paper. Google that. It's not just a piece of paper. Citizenship, there's thousands of benefits. Well, one thing is the presumption that you're an immigrant. There's a general presumption that everybody's an immigrant and needs to show a green card unless you can prove otherwise at the border, every single person. That comes into play if you're a snowbird and you want to stay too long. Or say you're a snowbird and you've stayed 6 months, and then this time you decide you want to go back for another 6 months. Maybe you don't want to go back this year, or maybe you want to extend your, So now you're staying longer and longer, and at some point at the border they may say, well, you're an intending immigrant, and all the presumptions. Okay, so there's one ground of excludability. If you're a citizen, you don't have to worry about that. Another ground of excludability, I was reading a major Canadian financial institution. I was reading a guideline they're sending to all their compliance managers and their brokers. And it basically says, right now, until the laws get settled, anybody who has anything to do with the cannabis industry, including the plumber who goes and fixes the plumbing in a hydroponic greenhouse, can conceivably be excludable from coming to the United States, even if it's legal in the jurisdiction that you're
Right,
in.
yeah.
So right now, that's all up in the air. If you're a U.S. citizen, you don't have to worry about that because you can never be undesirable. They have to.
That's a really fascinating, thing generally. The idea that, U.S. citizens basically can commit as many crimes as they want. And, and still enter the United States.
Now, if it's something that we, the United States has jurisdiction of, I mean, they can, if it's criminal, sex tourism,
Well,
stuff
yeah,
like that. But generally, they can't keep you out. I think of that all the time when I cross the border. Okay, I'm crossing Canadian, I got to be, make a presentation, that I'm going to be asked this and that. Coming back to the United States, it's like, well, what am I carrying that they can take away? That's about it. They're going to let me in, right?
Sure.
So you're, as a dual citizen, you've got that advantage on both sides of the border.
Oh, I think that dual citizenship is great as long as it can be maintained. The problem that we've got today is the application of all these unintended regulatory rules seems to me to be forcing people into a situation where they have to choose between being able to live a sort of normal, financially productive life in Canada or the UK or somewhere, and their U.S. citizenship, which is, I don't think any of this is really intended, but the simple fact of the matter is that that's where it is. I mean, how would you advise somebody to reconcile those competing interests? I mean, it's really hard, to live as a U.S. citizen outside the United States. It's really hard.
I'd say it's hard for two reasons. Number one, find out exactly what your hardship is, because I hear stories like yours, but I also hear stories about it's easy peasy. You know, I just have to add another form onto my tax return. It comes tax time. So number one, find out really what the hardship is. And to do that, I would suggest talking to a number of people. I'm sure you know them well. I'm sure some of them are going to be on your show, who specialize in that interface of Canada, U.S. finance and taxation. Mm-hmm. It's a subspecialty in itself. You can't just put a Canadian accountant in a room and an American accountant in a room.
Absolutely right.
It's a subspecialty in a lot of people, growing specialty. I don't know how many people on LinkedIn are linked to me that do cross-border tax and finance. So number one, find out what a hardship it really is. Are you just hearing horror stories?
Right.
Number two, and this is really a hard part, you got to have a crystal ball and look in the future. You don't know when that citizenship is going to come in handy. I see it because I've been doing this 40 years, and I see people whose citizenship was taken away in the olden days, and now they want it back, and they never thought that they would need their citizenship.
Sure.
I mean, the examples, I just make lists of examples. You think you're very happy with your employer, your job, or your business in Canada, and you think it's going to go on forever. Well, the average technical and professional job in North America lasts 3 years. So all of a sudden, 3 years later, you've renounced your citizenship, and you can't send your resume to New York anymore, for that job, with your company that's going on both sides, without going through the work permit. Your kids, all of a sudden, you got rid of citizenship for yourself and your kids, or it didn't pass on to a new kid, and they want to go to Berkeley. Okay, well, I'm guessing the tuition for non-residents is going to be tens of thousands of dollars more than it is for residents. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, and this is very important for professionals handling matters of denatural, of renunciation. You may get a phone call and say, why didn't you tell me my kid was going to have to pay non-resident tuition? Like I always say, it can come back and bite you in the rear for things you don't even conceive of.
Right.
You can't.
Or even, we don't know, how laws might evolve. Part of the problem is that for the last 15, 18 years or so, there's been a gradual evolution in the laws that have combined to create a sort of regulatory whole that's far greater than the sum of the parts. If I can put it that way. We don't know where these laws will go either. I'm sure that most people, not all obviously, but most people would prefer to be able to keep U.S. citizenship. So maybe your suggestion of really try to localize what the problem is.
Exactly, that's articulated very well.
Yeah, okay, so localize the problem and see if you can or are prepared to deal with it.
And then just realize there's a whole bag of benefits that you may not even be thinking of, that may not even exist now. Like you say, the laws
right.
change a lot.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. I know I've been to, I was at the border once with somebody. Now, this isn't relating to citizenship, but it relates to our issue. Bringing them in on a TN NAFTA permit. It's an executive, right? A high-level person, professional. And this was even before we started this massive record sharing between Canada and the U.S. Now it's even worse. But what they would do routinely is fax the RCMP for an arrest, any arrest records. And so they said, hey, when you were 17 years old, you robbed a beer truck in Oakville. And you were there with Sam whatever. They had the name of the guy. He was wearing a green coat. And this guy was just amazed. He says, I forgot that. I haven't even seen that guy. I forgot the name of this guy, and they've got all these records. Now, we eventually got him in, but wouldn't it have been nice to avoid all that problem in the first place?
Yeah, no question about that. Actually, on that particular topic, I'm going to ask you a general question. I'm not expecting you to know the answer because there probably isn't an answer, but if I can get your thoughts on this, okay, just to put it. So there's a former Toronto Blue Jays pitcher who was charged with some domestic assault thing, and last week the charge was withdrawn in exchange for what's called a peace bond. Do you have any thoughts or information specifically on whether just the fact of arrest coupled with a peace bond could give somebody problems in terms of entry into the United States?
Now, we don't know what's in the computers. You know, we've done tours in all the major ports of entry. I personally have, but it's kind of like they cover the screens, and when
Sure,
you ask them
yeah.
questions, they don't tell you. So, you know, I can't really tell you where that would come, you know, whether that would come up or not.
But do you think there's a possibility that it could?
Yeah, and you know, sometimes information comes out in different ways. Sometimes the person will talk about it. Like I said, remember the pocketbook and the wallet. Sometimes they go through your stuff and see papers. You know, they ask you, or they may know you, like if it's a high profile person. And then, you know, going into the grounds of excludability. I mean, there's certain. You know, the fact that you're arrested, you know, I'm a little weak on this area, you know, the litigation.
Well,
grounds
you're
of
better at it
excludability.
than I am,
Yeah,
so,
okay.
yeah, feel free.
But there's also, if you admit the elements to a crime, you know, you can be excluded. And at any rate, you don't want to be pulled over for secondary inspection for them to be asking these questions. I mean, the classic thing I hear is, they kept me for 5 hours at the border. Now, who wants to be 5 hours at the border, you know, answering questions, even if they...
Who wants to answer any questions at the border? I mean, clearly that is one of the advantages of you know, of retaining U.S. citizenship, but not the only advantage. I mean, I think that there's an age element in here as well, and sort of what I would call a stage of life element. I mean, I've never been overly enthusiastic about helping younger people renounce U.S. citizenship. I mean, particularly if they're in areas where, you know, the job opportunities are clearly existing and, you know, good in the United States. But they do anyway. I think the way I see the problem is that as people sort of transition in life to the problem of financial planning and retirement planning, which presupposes living off capital, this is where it becomes extremely difficult to maintain U.S. citizenship, at least under the present laws. But, you know, we are hoping for an end to, you know, the U.S. tax policies of what they would call citizenship taxation, that I would call imposing worldwide taxation on the tax residents of other countries.
And on the topic of aging, I know it's the new generations complain about this, but the boomers just keep on going. And in my case, I'm 68 and I'm dating a woman from Canada, and you can see how, without going into specifics of our situations, you can see how dual citizenship and the opportunity to work in different countries can spark up when you're almost 70 years old.
You might be able to get Canadian citizenship. Yeah, who knows? You know, well, I think that's right. I mean, your point, you know, you're giving, I think, the same point in a different way, that we just don't know what the future will hold.
And then, you know, there's a lot of talk about that I hear a lot. Well, I never want to leave Canada because of all the benefits. Well, again, make sure you know, because, you know, the more I'm learning about, you know, I don't want to criticize, but the more I learn about health benefits here and what's available health benefits in the U.S., I don't think the difference is as stark as people think it is. I don't think the benefit is proportionately that great in terms of health benefits. I mean, you're not going to be out on the street without health insurance if you're in, you know, if you end up in the U.S. So I think a lot of those reasons, just make sure you know the facts before you give up your citizenship.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's right. I don't think that general statements about the availability of Medicare, you know, in the United States are correct. I mean, I'm not by any means an expert on this, but I mean, there are different components to it, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, there are different categories of U.S. citizens, right, living in Canada. Some of them have already sort of satisfied the prerequisites, you know, for Social Security and Medicare and stuff like that. And others not only have not satisfied the prerequisites, but have satisfied no prerequisite, you know, because they're these sort of, you know, accidentals. But I think that, you know, what the takeaway from that would be that everybody's situation is different,
Mm-hmm.
and you really need to, explore your own situation and see what it really means for you.
And there's another area, we're talking about people who, either Canadian citizens or dual citizens. There's also people with green cards, who stay on green cards forever and don't get dual citizenship. We're
That's
talking more about
interesting.
giving them up, but that's a whole,
Yeah.
that's kind of overlaps with what we're saying. But I think what we're seeing something very, very important now is how the current administration is interpreting the law, which says that you should not be a public charge if you have a green card.
I
You
saw
know, how you
that.
interpret that or not. Now, people who turn their green cards into citizenship don't have to worry about accepting Part D and Medicaid.
That's right.
But people who said, "Oh, I'm just fine on this green card. Why should I convert it to citizenship?" now have to look at that.
Well, what I find interesting about that, having had a large number of discussions with people over the years who seem to maintain these green cards for, decades.
Yeah, exactly.
Why do they go to so much work to do that when all they really, is it that they lack the physical presence thing to become citizens? Or-
I think it's inertia, number one, and number two, emotional attachment to just being loyal to Canada.
Well, the whole citizenship thing, I think, is less and less a question of loyalty and more a question of practicality.
Yep.
But that's great. Thank you so much
You're
for
welcome,
coming in
John.
today, and I am certain that we will be picking this up, as this whole thing unfolds. But I really appreciate your thoughts, and I appreciate your rationality on this, and I appreciate your willingness to try to, sort of, parse out of this confusing area some very specific questions for people to ask.
Thanks, it's been fun, and thanks for the invitation.
Thanks, Joe.
Goodbye.
Okay.